Hi, it is 12:30. Time to dive into Windows 11 and Microsoft Intune. Welcome so much, Mike. Thank you for joining. I've been told we'll be joined by Max shortly as well, who is somehow part or beyond, not part, it's Intune support, put it that way, leading that team. I can give probably some additional details about that role.
Yeah, we can introduce Max. I think, especially with this group, it'll be nice to introduce Max. And I'm just checking to see if he's here yet. I don't see him.
I see him as you showing up, your name
Oh,
there.
Probably because he forwarded the invite.
oh, there he is. Oh, it's because I forwarded it.
Two Mike Danos.
That's perfectly okay. I don't mind
Okay.
having two of you.
This is new. Well, awesome. So Max, you can hear and see, and actually, can everyone see my? No, I'm not sharing my screen yet. I'm going to share my screen if that's all right.
Oh yes.
Okay,
That's why we're here.
This one, perfect. So I'm just going to show this. Just make sure that works. There we go.
Good to me. Yeah, that's good.
Let me pull this over, and I'm going to pull up. So we have Q&A open. We're going to sort of leave this a little bit open as we go. If folks have questions, feel free to pop that in Q&A, and we'll do our best to sort of answer as we go. And let me see if there's anything else. Let's see. Oh, that's what I was looking for. Chat. There we are. And I'll lift chat up as well. So let's get started. First of all, thanks for having us. And a bit of an introduction. My name is Mike Danoski. I'm a senior program manager at Microsoft working on device configuration. The team that I work on owns the areas of device configuration, endpoint security, group policy analytics, all that fun stuff inside of MEM, inside of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And Max, if you'd like to introduce yourself, but for just to sort of like, for folks who haven't seen Max before or talked to Max before he goes and introduces himself, he is the hands-on keyboard behind the Intune sub-team Twitter alias over in our support as a feature team, which that team runs our support org, builds our tools, does all the planning for all the teams and all that stuff. So Max, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hard to follow up with that, but yeah, thanks, Mike. Hey, everyone. So of course, I'm Max Stein. I am, like as Mike mentioned, I am the face and keyboard guy before or behind Intune support team or the Intune sub team Twitter handle. You may have interacted with me before. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking with all of you. We love our MEM-powered community and always love the features and feedback. As like Mike mentioned too, I'm a part of our support as a feature team, or what we call SAF. We support Intune, of course, as a feature. And anything and everything from social readiness and comps, and things like our what's new and then development docs. If anyone has any feedback, we are the team to go to. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, and Max said the magic word, feedback. So one of the nice things and one of the reasons why we're really excited to work with user groups is to get feedback as well. So while we can sort of chat about what we have planned for today, so a recap of sort of what we've accomplished in 2021, the current state, what we're hearing, and then looking ahead over the next year, and then we can do some Q&A at the end as we go. We have 30 minutes, so we're going to fly today. I also, some of this content and some of these topics we did discuss at Ignite. There were a couple sessions where actually this slide might look vaguely familiar. We talked a little bit about this at Ignite. So if there are questions about that kind of stuff as well, because I know we had a couple roundtable sessions on the same themes that filled up pretty quickly. So if folks have questions or comments or anything like that, please feel free to use the Q&A box and we'll get right into it. So 2021 recap. What's going on right now in device configuration in Microsoft Endpoint Manager? We're really, it's sort of the first steps into a rebuild. I use this slide a lot to talk about the rebuild that we're doing in the past, and especially with users who are graph aware, I'll say, right? Because the majority of endpoint manager customers may not be graph aware. They may not be aware that there's multiple graph calls to create different types of policies and profiles, and that things are different depending on where you configure them. And we're really making a huge step forward in trying to simplify a lot of that, provide clarity where we can. And the first thing that has been apparent to folks is the introduction of the settings catalog. And that really is the first insight that we are giving to sort of what we're doing behind the scenes. We're rebuilding our policy engine and where we get policy from and how we write it. We, in the past year, have added, let's see, when the settings catalog came out, we had just under 1,000 settings. We're now well over 10,000, and the number itself is comprised of not only CSP back settings, but also ADMX settings for Edge, OneDrive, and Office. And as you'll notice too, not everything is there. For example, things like Wi-Fi profiles or things that are more a complicated configuration where everything kind of has to be configured together for it to work correctly, or just having a more, like the CSP isn't necessarily a curated experience, ones where they just take a XML blob where maybe some curation helps. And something that you may have seen and will continue to see moving forward is where applicable, we'll add pointers. So we'll say, hey, if you search for Wi-Fi profiles, it's not here, but you should actually head over to this other location to configure these. So the net of this is you'll start to see some things change. In the past, a lot of the settings creation is research-based. So we would know about new settings and policy coming out, and we would go and research and figure out what all the different cases are and write UX to it, and it was all custom UX. And moving forward, it's data-driven. We're using definition files that the Windows team publishes, also known as DDFs, and building out all of our settings. And then moving forward for the next 6 months to a year and probably beyond, just going back and making everything a little more uniform in the most seamless way we can. And just trying to clean up some of the things that have been introduced by the iterative approach over the past really 6 or 7 years that Intune has been around, back to the Silverlight days. And hopefully for folks that are sort of new to the ecosystem, it should appear to be getting a little more simplified in some of those ways. And so the settings catalog, moving forward, what we're looking at is in the past where maybe you would say, where is this setting that I want to configure? And that would dictate where you go in our user experience to go create a policy with that setting. Today you have the choice. You can say, do I want to use settings catalog, or do I want to start with a template with stuff that's all sort of similar? So a lot of settings that are scenario based. And you'll see us adding additional templates as we go forward now that we sort of have this tool set to go build them out in more meaningful and curated ways. So the settings catalog has a new approach, and if you haven't played around with it, I highly recommend just going in and playing around with it a bit. In the past, one of the areas where we fell short was the ability to handle what's called tri-state, or having not configured for certain settings. And really what we wrote that to was if the setting didn't support sort of like a not configured to default state, we couldn't set it back. And so what we're doing moving forward is with settings catalog, it's an add remove. So when you remove a setting, we'll actually go and send a remove command down to the device. In the past, a policy would save like all of the states for all of the settings that are in that policy, even if it was set to not configured. The way we handle this moving forward, and if you've interacted with the graph side at all for some of this stuff for this new graph endpoint, you'll notice that the policy only saves the stuff that you configure. And if something gets removed on the back end, what we'll do is we'll actually go and send the remove command down to the device. This is usually where people have questions about tattoo removal and how to remove certain settings. And really what it comes down to is whether the setting has a default or whether we can just remove the enforcement and leave the setting there. So like a good example is BitLocker. If you set the remove command for BitLocker, we're certainly not going to go decrypt the device, but the user now has the ability to, and stuff like that. One of the things that I always am soliciting is if you have feedback or certain scenarios that are troublesome, because when we get to the example part, that's where we can take action. So if you have feedback about certain scenarios for tattoo removal and things like that, or particular settings, please reach out and let us know. Moving forward, since we are all data-driven now, we're getting more intelligence behind the settings as far as where they're applicable. You'll notice there's a filter today that will help you narrow down the settings in the catalog. It is always, it is going to be if it's guaranteed. So for example, like Edge will apply to any, really any SKU of Windows, Edge policy through ADMX. So it won't show up if you narrow down the filter, but for the most part, we're looking at ways to add additional filters moving forward to help folks. So you could say something like, right now we have it based on essentially addition. So you could say, show me everything that will work on HoloLens, and we'll show you all of those settings instead of going through and having to create 3 or 4 multiple profiles to get that scenario fully covered. We introduced search. We have some improvements to make in search, but we introduced search, and that's a great way to see settings that may span across different scenarios. So if you search for something like Bluetooth, not only will you see the Bluetooth settings on how Bluetooth behaves, but you'll also see the connectivity CSP settings just to turn off Bluetooth, and maybe some other related settings, just as an example. In the past, in Intune, we defaulted to device scope. And if you're familiar with how some CSP settings work, some of them support device scope or a user scope, which means it either writes to HKey local machine or HKey current user. In plain speak, that means if it's device scope, it'll hit everyone who uses the device. If it's user scope, it'll only hit the user it's targeted to. There's some nuances with how you can target those, as in targeting a user scope policy to a device is similar to like a loopback merge if you're coming from GPO, or going back and grabbing user settings and applying it to everyone on the device. One other thing in the settings catalog is you'll notice the tooltips and strings are directly what is defined 99.9% of the time. If there's some confusion and some names or something like that, we'll certainly try and make it a little bit easier, but we're not going through and changing things too much so that we're not introducing new confusion by coming up with new terms and strings and stuff like that. As I mentioned up top, we have not configured state. If you're using a template or a baseline moving forward, we have handling for not configured as well, which works in a very similar way to add remove settings, but in a little different UX flow. We currently have a settings catalog for Windows 10 and Mac OS. Mac OS consists of Edge settings, and we'll be moving forward to add additional Defender settings, and you'll see that area grow over the next year. And the new overview page and new reporting. So pretty much right now with settings catalog, the stuff that you see as far as the reporting and the new overview page, you'll start to see pop up in other places as we continue to make those investments. Any questions on that? Before I jump into sort of what we're hearing today. I see, how often do you update administrative templates in Intune? Oh, great question. For example, there are updates on October 12th, cumulative update. They're not in Intune yet. Is that for, I'm interested to know what ADMX said, if that's Windows ADMX or Edge or Office or OneDrive Windows. So yeah, that's interesting. I will look into that. There's a print.admx. Okay. I'll look into that. And it looks like you have a support case open. This is Jay in the chat that I'm reading. That one, let me go and check on. So right now what we do is you'll see settings first in administrative templates, which is a template type. The service behind that is the group policy service internally and inside of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. That's a service that goes through and does an install of the ADMX before dropping down the config. That's the team that I work with where we are ingesting updates and things like that. So you'll see them there first, and then we go and pipe those changes over to settings catalog. Within the next few months, that gap is going to close quickly. If we missed something like updates to print ADMX, I'll go look into that and see what we missed. Mostly the ones that update most frequently are things like Edge, OneDrive, and Office. And you'll see that those we are trying to get into beta channel for Edge. There's some timing challenges there to make sure that, once the setting is fully written, that we can add it and deploy it, right? Deploying a cloud service and making sure that we get everything in time and things like that. So we're trying to drive that further up so that you have a little more extra time to configure those settings before new releases come out. But I'll look in on that printing ADMX one. And if you feel comfortable, you can drop the support case and I can go take a look at that too. The support case number. What else? Let's see. Any other settings catalog questions before I sort of talk about some of the things we're hearing? Here's another different question. If you're just getting started in Intune, what's your guidance for using templates versus settings catalog to prepare ourselves for the best upcoming changes to the product? Should we avoid templates and just use settings catalog? Great question. And I'll talk a little bit about that in this next section. So best practices. I promise I didn't prompt for that question. So moving forward, and depending on the type of admin you are and the needs of the business, and where you are in your cloud journey could definitely impact the answer, how I would answer this question. And one of the things we're looking at is providing more guidance going forward on some suggestions on how people can deploy policy. And some of the best practices I see, if you're just starting off and you don't have anything, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And if you have requirements coming in from security and things like that, a great way to get started is to use the baseline. But if you're already fully deployed and you're already fully covered, it wouldn't really make sense to go and deploy the baseline on top. If you are just adding a couple settings and you're sort of already deployed and you just want to add some new settings, settings catalog is a great way to do it. I talk to customers who have settings catalog policies with hundreds and hundreds of settings in them. That's totally okay too. People are using it as their own benchmark / baseline. Basically where we're driving and where we kind of are today, but we're improving and making it better, is that no matter what policy you deploy, we crunch it all together before we send it down to the device. Today, this provides some challenges with detecting conflict that we're looking at resolving very soon. And as well as looking at what tools we can produce and create to help folks understand when there is conflict or overlap, as well as doing intelligent merges when it makes sense. I think the one that we recently did was, I want to say ASR rules will merge instead of doing a conflict or identifying and reporting a conflict. But yeah, so if you're starting fresh, use a baseline. If you'd like to use settings catalog, use a settings catalog policy for additional settings. Templates are scenario focused. So a good example I want to use is if you're going to use like Windows Hello for Business, going and starting with the Windows Hello for Business template is a great way to make sure that you're getting fully configured. Going into endpoint security, I highly recommend if you're going to deploy security product that you start with the templates that exist in endpoint security. Those are curated in such a way that we make sure that we're getting all the settings together. We're making improvements in those spaces and some improvements in those flows that you may not exactly see in the settings catalog. Really, the spirit behind the settings catalog is we've gone and added these settings, let's expose them. And if folks want to do like an analogy is if you're using building blocks and whether you want to start with a kit, right? And you want to go build off a build based on a kit with instructions and numbered bags, or if you want to sort of go to the wall and grab the pieces you like and build your own thing. Both are totally valid. One of the other routes that we're hearing a lot right now is folks that are on-prem and they have a lot of GPO and they have a lot of old GPO. And that's where GP Analytics comes in. I'm just checking my time. We got 10 minutes left. In GP Analytics, it's a great tool where you can upload your group policy objects and it analyzes them to show you what's supported in MDM. It's not the end. There's a private preview right now to migrate into a settings catalog policy, but that's not your last step. It is a tool where you can go back and analyze. And some of the feedback we're seeing right now and some of the questions we're getting is around very old settings and bringing them forward. As Michael mentioned in the previous session, we added 1,400 new settings. This is based on feedback from customers who are asking for these settings to unblock. And so they're currently in a hybrid model, a hybrid AADJ, and they are managing devices both via MDM and GPO and want to move to MDM. And so they're going through piece by piece and bringing things over. My suggestion is not everything should come over. If you're hybrid right now and you got some stuff that works in GPO, and it's a setting that determines how a client machine communicates with a domain controller, leave it in GPO right now until you're ready to go full Azure AD. Right now is also a great time with Windows 11 coming out to sort of create a greenfield approach for Windows 11 and say, I'm going to start off and do MDM only for this if I can, and really getting in there and working back from your requirements. A lot of folks who are in the GPO only land today may not have reference of where the requirements came from. And that's where we get questions about people asking, hey, why don't you support disabling widgets? And not realizing that that's a Windows Vista setting, right? That doesn't really make sense moving forward into MDM. Moving forward, we're continuing to take feedback and adding settings coverage. No commitments, but right now we're hearing a lot about GPP. We're hearing a lot about drive mapping, especially as people move to the cloud and trying to figure out how to connect back to on-prem resources and especially file shares and things like that. So feedback around that is definitely something we're keen to listen to. And yeah, just expanding settings coverage as we go. Now, it may seem a little bit contradictory because as many folks may recall, that CSP and MDM was supposed to be the easier way. Now we're adding additional settings. That's kind of where that previous slide comes from, is you don't have to add everything in MDM, but if you are at the spot where you're absolutely blocked because there's X number of missing settings, or X number of settings that you really just need in there in MDM, let us know. We'll see if we can add them just to, at this point, block folks. But obviously the guidance and best practices is to keep it simple. Use the most recent technology if you can. It's really easy for me to say, hey, use all the latest stuff, but it wouldn't be realistic to say, to expect everyone to be able to move over as quickly as you can. So if there's stuff that we can do to help enable you make the move or be sort of in the transient state between, let us know. That's the feedback we're looking for. Looking ahead, the catalog, always adding more settings. I think I got to check. I think we're deploying today the 2111 settings, depending on region. So probably by Monday, if you look, there will be another 200 settings or so. Some of those are the highly requested system settings and some of the auditing settings. We're looking into what additional filters we can add to help folks create more intelligent policy, adding catalogs for other platforms as we move forward. And then really for policy all up, simplifying everything throughout, creating additional templates and improving templates as well as the baselines. The baselines aren't going anywhere. You'll see additional baselines as well as improvements to the baselines. And then policy mechanics as we go forward. I think in 2111, which is our release that comes out later this month, the full release, when that comes out, when we post what's new, you'll see things like duplicate show up for settings catalog policy. And we plan to continue making investments like that as we move forward. Some of them seem like no-brainers, but really the changes that we've been making in the past year have enabled us to make those, make some of those key changes. So as we move forward, you'll see baselines get added to this, but really what it comes down to is policy will be policy. We're getting away from having sort of profile types as a concept, and it really comes down to how do you want to create your policy? Do you want to do settings catalog? Do you want to do a template that's more scenario focused, or do you want to start with a baseline, which might cross some scenarios? And right now they're mostly security focused. We've got the Edge baseline, the Windows 10 MDM baseline. And we're working on a few other baselines, and there's one other one that I always forget, but it's in there. Oh, the Defender baseline is in there as well. So with that, we've got some time for Q&A. Anyone have any questions or anything you'd like me to comment on or chat a little more about? Otherwise, I can come up with questions too. Is there a way to migrate your existing configuration profiles into new settings catalog? Not today. We are looking at the templates that we have today to see if they make sense moving forward. Some of the templates that exist today, like if I'm thinking Windows 10, I'm thinking device restrictions, is kind of a catch-all and has a whole bunch of stuff in there that isn't really scenario focused. So it's stuff that we're investigating and doing some research to figure out if it makes sense to just port those over to settings catalog. There are some other configuration profiles that certainly won't go into settings catalog or won't map into settings catalog. Like things like Wi-Fi profiles, VPN profiles, certificates, email profiles, all that stuff you won't see over there. Is there an Excel showing all the available settings? So this is a good question. Well, they're all good questions. I can't pick a favorite. At the end of the year, I'll be posting some sort of document. I got to figure out where to post it with all the settings that we have by the end of the year, and then something that we can maintain and move forward. So yeah, we will. It's not there today. Oh, these are in the open. Okay. There's a couple pieces of feedback. It'd be great to be able to add comments. It would be great to be able to add comments to settings and configuration profiles, kind of like you could in per setting for GPO. I hear that feedback. And we're really missing GPP in the Intune pilot project. Example, mapping network drives. Yeah, some of those GPPs we're taking feedback right now and figuring out the best approach on what we can do moving forward. There's a question for Aria. Is integration between MCM and Intune that would allow driver firmware updates? I'm not sure if there's an answer to that one. I know I can't answer it. And Max, since we have you, did you have any troubleshooting tips you wanted to share in the next 3 minutes? We haven't really had a lot of troubleshooting related question, but that's okay.
No, thanks for the tag. I do see like a hand raised in the participant list. I don't know if that's a still hand or something that we can answer. Hey, still hand, no big deal.
Okay.
Awesome. Top troubleshooting tips. I think most of folks are already aware. Some neat things that you can see in console today in the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center under the Help and Support blade. There's a troubleshooting feature. That's a quick way if you're running into policy-related issues, issues with user enrolling their devices. It's a quick way you can punch in the user's VPN. You can see any policies. You can see policy deployment errors, things like that. A neat one, sometimes more often than not, a license is not assigned to a user. So that's an easy one to figure out where you don't have to drill down into the user and device and that sort of thing. Other things in or go ahead.
Is that during the case creation flow you're referring to?
Under the help and support blade, there's another blade kind of nestled in there called troubleshooting. So more or less kind of around in that same pathway, there's a specific blade for troubleshooting. That's where folks and admins can access that.
And I know that the team is also making Max's team is also making investments in the case creation flow. So when you actually go through and start creating a case, when you ask the question, we're running troubleshooting checks and diagnostics on the back end. So if you say, yeah, I can't enroll this device and it ends up being, the user's not licensed or something like that, we'll pop that up for you. Some of those quick questions sort of to save you and both support time when you first get that case open.
Good call out. know we got a couple minutes left here. But yeah, other things in the help and support plate. If anyone has any feedback around just in general when you're in that support creation flow, either creating like a new case or maybe just some of the diagnostics or docs that were kind of presented, feel free to tag us. We're out, like I mentioned, we're out on social, we're out on Twitter, tag Intune subteam, and we can feed that directly back with our team and we can get that. We'd love to learn more about the scenario and get that situated.
There's a question about hitting sync. If you hit it on the device, it's the same as hitting it in the console. The only difference is the console sends a push notification to the device and says, hey, come sync. So if you press it on the device, that's fine as well. If you have access to it, right? If you're just testing, just give it a minute. Policy will compute in a minute or so. If you're having grouping issues, and you're just testing and it's a test environment, it's a small environment, doing something like all users will, doing something like all users is quicker. Dynamic groups might add a little bit more time if you're just doing quick testing. And there's a question about log me in. I don't think we have an answer to that. That's a compliant, I believe from my days back in support, that has to do with compliance with privacy and things like that, which obviously from us being Microsoft, that seems a little odd. But I believe that's something that the support org runs. The question is will LogMeIn continue being the standard remote assistance tool for Intune support? I know when I started at Microsoft nearly 9 years ago, we were also using LogMeIn. So I think it's sort of ingrained in the support org as a compliance thing. But I will recognize that is time. We're 1 minute over. Thank you for the questions today. Hope it was helpful. If you have any questions going forward, you know where to reach us. And again, thanks for hosting us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you both, Mike and Max, for joining. Great information. Thanks. Lots of good answers for the questions. Super grateful for you joining us. Yeah. So we'll have, once again, a quick little break, about 8 minutes before we'll dive into a little bit around deploying Windows 11 in the enterprise for those organizations that want to start to test these scenarios. And Max and Mike, feel free to stick around if you want to learn about deployment, but I have a feeling you kind of have that information already. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, all. Cheers.
Bye, folks. Have a great rest of the day and a great weekend.
I'm going ahead and go share the screen or steal the screen real quick. So once again, a quick break. Zoom at 1:10 p.m. And that will be in about 7 minutes now.